Yo, what's going on, snipers, and welcome to the start of a brand new series. And yes, we are starting up our Throwback 2000 franchise mode with the Nashville Predators. So as you guys know, I made a 1999-2000 roster build a couple months ago. Currently still working on a 92-93 roster as well for the end of NHL 24. But anyways, this roster took me a lot of time to make, and we're finally starting up a series with it. So I'm very excited to get it underway and see how it works out. Obviously, I've seen people use my roster before, but I haven't been able to have that long of a throwback franchise mode with one of my rosters before. I've done a couple years of simulation in some of my other builds, but I've never done like a full 25-year franchise mode. But I think there is probably enough time for us to do 25 years in this series, or get at least close to it, because we still have like 5+ months till NHL 25. So we should be able to get quite far into the future in the series, and it'll be interesting to see what a lot of these guys end up simulating like. So should be a lot of fun. Obviously, doing what the Nashville Predators is interesting because they're more of a rebuilding team during this point in time. They're only in their second NHL season, so they do have some okay players. They do have some good future prospects, but in general, it's a team that's going to take a little bit of work first for us to get them into a competitive state, I would assume. But first, before we take a look at their roster, I will show you guys how the divisions are set up and all that stuff. And we'll also show you guys like some stuff with like the AHL and all that too, because as I mentioned in my roster overview video, I have like all these AHL players as well. I do have unsigned prospects for each team as well. The Atlanta Thrashers won't have any unsigned in this series because the fact I substituted in their created team for the Winnipeg Jets, but every other team I'm using their real teams in game, just because of the fact that there was some issues where basically if you substitute every NHL team with my created teams in the NHL, for some reason it removes the unsigned prospects. I was trying to get EA to basically allow created teams to have unsigned players in franchise mode this year, but they weren't able to get it done this year. Hopefully it's a thing that they get to in the future though, because I know that it will make it a lot better, because obviously we'll have our custom jerseys I've made, the custom arenas, but instead we're going to have to be dealing with like Bridgestone Arena here for some reason instead of Gaylord Entertainment Center, which is kind of annoying, but is what it is. At least we'll have unsigned prospects, which is nice, and that'll make this franchise mode a little bit more interesting. So anyways, let's take a look here at the division setup. I'll show you guys how every division is set up, so that way you guys can kind of know what the league is looking like at this point in time. So this is the division we're going to be in, the Central Division. We're going to be stuck with the St. Louis Blues, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Detroit Red Wings. Obviously, Detroit's a killer good team at this point in time. Like, I mean, crazy good depth. Yzerman, Fedorov, you know, all those great players. Nick Lidstrom. Chicago, on the other hand, is kind of a team that's fallen off a little bit. They do still have some pretty good players, though, like Alexei Zhamnov, so they do have some stuff to build around, and definitely more so than us. And then the St. Louis Blues. This team actually won the President's Trophy in 99-2000, but lost in the first round. They also have some very good talent, but they don't have Doug Wade or Keith Tkachuk yet. That would come down the line in the next few years, so it'll be interesting to see how good the St. Louis Blues do in this universe, and if they do bring in those guys at some point in time. Also in the Western Conference, we'll go to, I guess, the Northwest Division. This one is primarily a Canadian Western division, except for Colorado, but Colorado's another very good team, obviously, at this point in time. Obviously, winning the Cup in 2001, so the year after this. They also won in 1996. You also have the Vancouver Canucks, highlighted by Mark Messier, which is really interesting. So that should be interesting to see how good the Canucks do at that point. You also have the Calgary Flames, who are kind of mid, not really great. And then you also have the Edmonton Oilers, who are also kind of mid, not very great. So that division, not the strongest division, but the Colorado Avalanche and Vancouver Canucks are pretty solid. And then obviously from here, having three good teams, you can see that there's not really a lot of playoff room for us to make it this first season. Also, the Pacific Division. This division's primarily California-based teams, but you have the Anaheim Ducks, or the Mighty Ducks basically at this point. You have the Dallas Stars, the San Jose Sharks, the Arizona Coyotes, which is the Phoenix Coyotes at this point in time. Now going to be Salt Lake, which really sucks because I wanted Arizona to stay in Arizona, but they're unfortunately relocating. But this is only 3 years, I guess, after they moved to Arizona from Winnipeg, which is interesting, or a few years. The Los Angeles Kings are the last team as well there, and they're kind of not great either. So some interesting teams in the Western Conference for sure. We head over to the Eastern Conference. Here is the Atlantic Division, which is primarily Pennsylvania-based teams and New York, New Jersey area. So you have Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. You have the Rangers, the Islanders, and the Devils. So some interesting teams there. Some pretty good teams too, because the Devils obviously were really good around this point in time. They won the Stanley Cup in 99-2000. You have Pittsburgh with like the likes of Yager, no Lemieux in this franchise mode, because I believe he was still out at that point in time due to his cancer diagnosis. So there's that. The Rangers team is pretty good though. This is the year after I guess Wayne Gretzky would have retired, so it's kind of interesting to note that. The Northeast Division, made up of Boston, Ottawa, Montreal, Buffalo, and the Toronto Maple Leafs, so some pretty solid teams in that division. And then finally, the Southeast Division, which is usually the weakest division in the NHL at this point in time, has Tampa Bay, Atlanta, Florida, Washington, and Carolina. So Washington and Carolina are decent-ish, definitely building their way up, but Florida is kind of a little bit inconsistent. They're somewhat solid, but they're not doing the best in terms of playoff simulation. And then Atlanta and Tampa both are very bad teams at this point in time as well. So that's basically how the divisions are set up for this franchise mode. Also the AHL, if I go back here quickly, the AHL also has all the AHL affiliates, which I'm not going to get through super in depth, but you can see this is our AHL affiliate. They are actually a IHL team, but we had to make more AHL teams. So we have the Milwaukee Admirals still as our affiliate. There's also like the Hartford Wolfpack for the Rangers, Grand Rapids, which is Ottawa's, Portland, which is Washington's, Providence, that's Boston's, Springfield, that is the Arizona Coyotes, and Worcester, which is the St. Louis Blues. So that's our AHL division that we're in, but you can see that there's a lot more AHL teams and IHL teams across the AHL. They only have 4 divisions down there as well. So there is that. Okay, now we'll get into what our roster's looking like for the NHL. The AHL, we'll take a look at our unsigned prospects as well, so you guys can kind of see who we could sign up in the next few years and hope that they develop. And then obviously in next episode will be more of a simulation episode. We'll also look at the draft class, I guess, in this episode too, so you guys can kind of see what is available for us to potentially go after. So I think we're going to go look at our NHL team via the edit line screen, and then that way we could take a look at the AHL and unsigned on their own. Actually, maybe we'll go through both edit line screens for the NHL and AHL, then go to unsigned, just because then you guys can kind of see how the lines are currently set up by the AI. So this is what our team is looking like, and as you can see, it doesn't really have the best depth. It has some okay players, but it's not really the most insane thing in the world. We have a first line of Patrick Schellberg, Cliff Ronning, and Scott Walker. Obviously, Scott Walker was a great Nashville Predator a few years after this. Like, he had some really solid seasons there in Nashville. Cliff Ronning, really underrated player. But then you have like Schellberg, who is kind of an inconsistent NHL player. Had some good seasons, had some bad seasons after this when he was playing with Anaheim. Like, he was more of a bottom 6 forward at that point. So it's a little bit of a weird top line for sure. Second line, we have Vitaly Yachmenov. We have Greg Johnson, rest in peace. Hopefully we can win a Stanley Cup with Greg Johnson, because he was a pretty good captain for the Preds for a number of years. You also have Rob Valachevic. So that's our top 6. Not the greatest when you have Rob Valachevic in your top 6, but here we are. A third line of Mark Mowers. You also have Tom Fitzgerald, and you also have Ville Peltonen, so another former captain in the NHL. I believe Fitzgerald, wasn't he a captain for Florida for a bit, or was that Scott Mellenby? I feel like Fitzgerald was a captain at some point, but I don't remember how long and what for. But I think he definitely had some sort of a captaincy. He might have been just an alternate captain, but I think he was a captain at one point. Ville Peltonen's an interesting one because he was drafted by the Sharks, played a few years there early in the 90s, then went back to Finland, then came back over, played with Nashville for a couple years, then went back to Finland again, I think it was, and then went and played with Florida in like 2007 around, so, or 2008, 2009, something like that. So yeah, Ville Peltonen is kind of an intriguing one in that sense. And then our fourth line is a little bit of a grindy line. You have Patrick Cote, who is an enforcer. I believe he got put in prison at one point. I was looking him up, I think, and I think I found out that he went to prison for like some sort of dumb shit. So shout out to Patrick Cote at least. But Randy Robitaille, solid defensive fourth line center right now. Maybe eventually he'll become more of a third line center for us, but right now he's not that bad. And then this is a big future piece of our team, which means maybe we want to get him higher in the lineup, obviously, because Valachevic doesn't really need to be that high. We could obviously move Legwand a lot higher. He's got top 6 potential, 79 at 19. He was a very high up pick the year before this, I think. So if we really want to make some line adjustments for next episode, I would recommend probably putting Legwand maybe into the top 6 almost already in a sense. Or we can move Fitzgerald to the right side, move Mowers down to the fourth line, And then Legwand could take over like that third line center spot. But Legwand doesn't have the best face-off stats. He only has a 70 on the face-off dot. But if we want him to develop anything, maybe we could put him down the middle. Or we could just put him on the right side next to Fitzgerald, or even get him into the top 6. But I think Legwand's an important piece, obviously, to the future of this team. So obviously, we should definitely try and find a way to get him as much ice time as possible, like maybe giving him some power play time, something like that. And then on the defensive side of things, it's a little bit interesting as well. You could also see why we're so bad of a team. We have Kimmo Timonen, who is only 24 at this point in time, does have a couple X factors. Pretty damn good defender, in my opinion, very underrated. So we have him at least to build around on the defensive side of things. Drake Barahowski, not really much of anything. Had some good seasons, had some bad seasons. Was a high-up pick by the Toronto Maple Leafs, but never really developed into that type of guy. You also have Richard Lindner, 22 years old, so at least he's a young defender, but not really much of anything, to be honest. Bill Holder is decent, but he is the oldest defender on this team at 32 years old. We do have a 25-year-old Carlos Graston, so a guy that could definitely just keep on the top 6. It would be interesting to win a cup with him as well, because rest in peace to him. Another guy that died back in 2011 in that plane crash, so kind of a sad one there. And we also have Craig Miller, who's pretty much basically like Richard Lindner and not really much of anything. So a couple young defenders, but they're not really ones that will develop probably in franchise mode. From a goaltending perspective, we have Mike Dunham, who's okay. He's 27 years old, a decent starter, but we do have a young 23-year-old Thomas Vokoun behind him, which obviously is going to be our guy going forward. Very excited to see how Vokoun pans out, because obviously in real life, I'd say he's one of the most underrated goalies as well during this time period, just based on the fact, I think if I remember right, him and Olaf Kolzig really had good goals saved above expected stats, so I think Vokoun might have been one of the most underrated goalies for the 2000s based on that stat line. So yeah, that's basically our dressed forwards. And then in terms of depth guys, we only have Sebastian Bordeleau currently up here, which is the father, I believe, of Thomas Bordeleau of the Sharks, if I remember right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is. So we can definitely get Bordeleau in the lineup if we want to as well, considering he's only 24. Maybe scratch the Enforcer and Cote instead. And then we have guys we could call up from the minors if we want to as well, obviously, to give us that more depth. Let me show you guys what Milwaukee is currently running. And it's not really much of anything. So there's Eric Bertrand, who's not going to develop into much because he's got low AHL top 6 potential. There's Mike Watt, who's kind of a guy we could probably call up. He's only 23. He could probably fit in as a depth forward for us and maybe develop into being a bottom 6 forward. He's not much of anything in real life, but he could be something decent in this franchise mode for the early years at least. We also have Marian Cesar, who's only 21. He also has bottom 6 potential. Maybe he becomes something for our fourth line at some stage. And then as well, we have Paul Healy, not really anything. Dennis Arkhipov is probably the most intriguing guy in the AHL, I would say, for our team. Only 20 years old. Technically was unsigned at this point, but obviously, considering he's a little bit older, we couldn't have him as an unsigned prospect. And the fact that he's Russian as well, we can't have unsigned Russian prospects, which kind of sucks. So Arkhipov is probably one of the best we have in the system. We also have Phil Crow, who's not much. He's old at this point. Peter Sikora, not the Peter Sikora that plays for the Devils, but a different Peter Sikora. This one is definitely more of a bust. You have Greg Klassen, not really much of anything. David Gosselin, not much of anything. Darren Hadar, great AHL player, not really a good NHLer. Dan Riva, this guy's nothing at all. AHL bottom 6 potential. And then we also have Ryan Tobler. Now, we could also try and tank year 1 if we really want to try and get one of the better prospects. So, if we want to, we could call up some of these guys that we know aren't going to pan out, like Riva and Tobler, use them as depth options instead. From a defensive standpoint, we do have Jan Vopat, who's okay. He would be an okay depth defenseman probably for the NHL level, so we could call him up. We also do have Rory Fitzpatrick, which is an interesting one, but he's already 25. I don't think he's going to develop much more. We have Evgeny Nemesnikov, the father of course, why am I drawing a blank? Vladislav Nemesnikov, that's who I was thinking of. I was thinking of a E name as well, but yeah, Evgeny Nemesnikov anyways. I believe he went by the name of John as well at points, which is interesting. We have Mark Morrow, who's not really anything. Andy Bernswig, or Bubba Bernswig his name is, and Pavel Skrbik. So you can see, like, in terms of potential guys in the AHL, you have some with Fitzpatrick, but he's already 25. Some with Vopat, but he's pretty much capped out at probably a 77. In terms of everything, we have probably Arkhipov, Watt were the guys that we get up there into the NHL. Maybe Cesar at some point as well. And then from a goalie perspective, we do have some goaltending. We have Chris Mason, which is intriguing, but he is 23 already. He does have high fringe starter potential, so it might be a little bit of a long shot to make it at this point, but who knows, there's a chance that Chris Mason can make the NHL. And we also have Jan Lasik, who's only 20 years old, but has AHL starter potential, but in real life he played, I think, one season as a backup. So technically I could have maybe made his potential a little bit better, but it is what it is. And we also have Alexander Boykov as a depth defenseman as well down there in Milwaukee. So kind of interesting to determine if we want to bring any of those players up to the NHL. There's also free agents we could sign before next episode as well if we want to fill out our depth a little bit more. Or bring in some guys that we could honestly just trade away at like the trade deadline and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and look at our unsigned prospects now, and then I'll show you guys what's available free agency wise, draft class wise, and then that'll be it for this first episode. A lot of stuff to look at, which is fun. So our unsigned prospects. Let's start off with our goalie prospect, which is not a great one. This guy was a high up pick. Brian Finley, he's got AHL starter potential, but he was a very high up pick. So if I wanted to give him his potential that it would have been at the time, he probably could have had, like, I'd say starter potential at least back in those days, but he didn't develop into being that guy for sure. He was, I believe, a top 10 pick, if I remember right, I think. But he didn't pan out like one, which is unfortunate. So we do have Finley for goalie prospects. Defensively, we do have one guy, really, and that's Andrew Hutchinson. Andrew Hutchinson never played a game with the Predators, but he is still a solid. Actually, did he play a game with the Predators? He might have. I might have lied right there. He might have played a game with the Predators. I feel like he might have. He also played with Carolina, Dallas, stuff like that, but he's more of a career depth defenseman. You also have Timo Helbling, which is an interesting one because of the lore of Timo Helbling, because technically he was dealt to the Tampa Bay Lightning for, I think it was a 9th round draft pick or something late like that. And then that pick that Nashville got for Helbling became Pekka Rinne, which is absolutely insane. So a little bit of a lore thing with Timo Helbling, but he's not really much of anything either. He might just be AHL filler for us in the next few years of franchise mode. Now you can see some decent prospects here, though. These, I believe, are our only 4 prospects. Yeah. Martin Erat, obviously the big one here. Top 6 potential, 70 at 18. Martin Erat's definitely a guy that's going to be future for this team. Him, David Legwand, that type of thing. So very excited to see if Erat pans out and becomes that type of guy we need for franchise mode. And then there's Adam Hall, which is more of a bottom 6 guy, but he does have very good face-off stats. He's a very good face-off guy for a right winger. He's also got a little bit more size to him, so he could add some grit to our bottom 6 down the road as well. So we do have some good forward prospects, but in terms of defense and goaltending, there's not really much there at all. So there's our unsigned prospects. Let's take a look at the free agent list, just in case you guys want me to sign anything before the start of episode 2. I don't think I will want to sign anything, just because I don't really like cheating the system a bit, but the AI definitely will be signing some stuff up in free agencies. So if we go to the goalie prospects, or goalie free agents, I should say, Roman Cechmanek is the big one. He's an 85 overall, but obviously getting a goalie doesn't make much sense when we have Vokun as a backup. We have Dunham. Doesn't really make sense at all. But you can see there is some guys to build around, like Gerbe, or not Gerbe, what am I saying? Gerber, goddamn. It's probably, combining Gerbe and Huey. That's why I say Gerbe. Goddamn, man. Anyways, Martin Gerber, Cristobal Huey. There's also some AHL goalies like Trefilov, Nurminen. Not really a whole lot. There is some prospects, but some won't develop. Like Tim Thomas, for example. He might have high starter potential, but he's already 25. So likely in this universe, he isn't going to be the god that he was back in 2011. So there is a lot of goalies, though, but some of them, like Backstrom, for example, could pan out. But I honestly would rather the AI sign these players and me not get free players, because it's just kind of more interesting to see what the AI does with them instead. So there is the goalies. If we look at defensive free agents, the best is Lubomir Sekera. So there are some guys that can help out with the depth on our team a little bit that we could easily trade away if we really want to get some assets back for them, like Kusera, Sikora, Numelin. Steve Smith falls to free agency, even though he was with the Flames this season, which is kind of annoying, but is what it is. A lot of old guys in the free agent department, but there is some with potential. Like you can see Merit Zidlichki, he was a future Predators player, but technically he was picked up by the Rangers in this draft. So if we want to bring in a future defenseman for our team, Zidlichky could make sense just based on the fact that he used to play for the Preds. But I would probably have him in the AHL for the first year or two of his career. So yeah, there is a bunch of random guys, but not necessarily the best of names. There is potential guys like Mark Streit too. So we could always try and cheese the system, but at the same time, I probably would rather take the slow approach rather than just signing players just to like bolster my AHL squad. Like I know that's what Tugi did with my roster, bolstered his AHL team, but I don't think I'm gonna do that just because I want the series to be something that takes a little bit more time than a few weeks or whatever. In terms of forwards, you can see there is some older guys. There's also guys like David Vaborny, future Blue Jacket, and obviously the Blue Jackets in the Wild don't exist in this franchise mode, so a little bit interesting on that front because there's 28 teams at this point in time. But yeah, you can see there's some young guys, JP Vijay, some useful guys, I guess. Left wing side of things, Zdeno, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, so I'm not even going to like try. I'm just going to say Cigar or something like that. Murray Craven, Esatikinen, a lot of old guys that used to play a lot in the 90s. That definitely fell off quite a bit. But some interesting names still, like Sylvain Turgeon, former Sens legend. Yeah, definitely a lot of names. And I know Tyler from my Discord channel would want me to sign his, I think he said his... I don't remember how he said he's related to Doug Dole, but I think he said he was related to Doug Dole. Yeah, so there is enforcers like Angel, Sad, Severson, Radis, Ivanons. So if we want to bring in some tough guys, you know, we could do that, but I don't really know if that's really going to be that useful for us. But yeah, the best forward is Robert Reichel. Technically, at this point in time, he had Arizona rights still, but he went overseas, so he's an interesting one. He'll definitely get signed by some team, but I don't know who. Also, salary cap is off. Another thing I should tell you guys before I forget. Just because, obviously, back in these days, there was no salary cap. Andy McDonald's the most intriguing forward prospect, but I don't feel like I want to cheat the system a bit. I would rather just draft some good players rather than just sign some random good guys in the first year already. Eric Perrin, decent player. So there is pretty much all of that. A lot of shit too, basically AHL players. But let's take a look at the draft class. This is the interesting part because obviously we should have a high up pick this year, permitted that we don't simulate good, because who knows how this is going to actually simulate. But you can see it's the Marian Gaborik draft class. So Marian Gaborik is the top prize. He would be very nice to put next to like a David Legwand and maybe a Martin Erat, because he can probably play on the left side based on being a left-handed shot. But there is a very good left winger that would be interesting. There's also some generated guys, but I'm not going to focus on them too much. Danny Heatley obviously would be a very, very nice player to put next to I'm drawing a blank again. What the heck am I saying? Legwand. I was going to say Scott Hartnell, but Scott Hartnell is technically another one that we could draft. Obviously, he was drafted by the Preds. He would be an interesting one considering he's a left winger. I believe I gave him like top 6 potential. Heatley's elite though, so it's going to be interesting if we get stuck with a good guy or not, depending where we draft. There's also some good defenders though, like Paul Martin, for example, Justin Williams, John Michael Lyles. There's basically draft picks all the way up until I think it's round 4. So there's a ton of guys we could draft. We could even draft Chris Kunitz for all you trolls in my Discord who tries to post Chris Kunitz gifts, you know? Because I hate Chris Kunitz just because of what he did to the Sens. But also, there's Henrik Lundqvist. We do have Vokun, but Henrik Lundqvist is a goalie prospect. It would be nice. He will take a while to develop because he's a low overall and obviously didn't play till 05-06, but still. You have a lot of solid players in this draft and also all the EA generated guys, which is interesting too, to give it a little bit more dynamic. So the first 4 drafts will have prospects I made, and then afterwards, obviously, I'll just be all generated guys, and I'll probably turn the draft class quality back up to medium from low. So, also Joel Ward, I mean, he used to play for the Preds at one point. So we could draft a lot of guys that actually played for the Preds at one point, which is cool. But yeah, if we even go to like the goalie situation, like, if we don't get Lundqvist, we could even draft Rick DiPietro. There's Ilya Brzgalov, but he's a little bit older. Michael Telquist, so some okay goalies, but obviously the main goalie to get is Henrik Lundqvist in this draft. So Going to be interesting to see where all those players go and that type of thing. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this first episode of our Throwback franchise mode with the Nashville Predators. So in next episode, we'll probably take it a little bit slow to start. We'll probably simulate maybe a couple months, like maybe till December 1st or so, just to kind of see how everything's simulating out up to that point in time. And obviously in a few episodes, we'll have our first draft and stuff like that, get this team set up for the future, because obviously right now we don't really have a whole lot, and we shouldn't be good for these first few years at least. So hopefully we draft well and build up a good prospect pool that we could take this team from where they are now into being a playoff contender. So anything down below, and I'll see you guys next time.